opportunity to talk about their experience? Okay, so interested to know how it was. Got any comments? I wonder, can you catch?
Yeah. Is it working? Oh,
yeah.
I came in late, so everybody told me what was going on and talking about it. But
yeah.
How's that? Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Because I came in late, it was explained to me what we were doing and talking about the visualization and the feeling. I find them clearly separated. I understand from all the anatomy that I've done over the years that I can see it, I can visualize it, but the feeling is a completely different sensation.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it hard to actually see and feel at the same time. I can't do it.
Okay. Someone else?
I found that interesting because I think I'm more kinesthetic in feeling. And I think probably randomly images come, but more external body images, because that's what I see most of. So yesterday, just kind of bringing in, because we've been looking at the skeleton, I just kind of suddenly saw myself as these bones and skeleton. It wasn't like super detailed, but it was like a different internal imagery, which I think over time would be quite useful in terms of, you know, identifying anatomically what's kind of happening with the skeletal system. But yeah, I can kind of almost see bones, which is just like it was there, but there was no attention going there, so I didn't notice it, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
So would I be right in saying, my understanding of what you're saying is that your kinesthetic image was informed by the visual? Pardon?
Guess so.
I'm just checking if that's...
Yeah, I mean, like...
That's what I'm hearing.
Oh, like Anna's saying, I don't know if you can... Well, I guess you
so
can.
Anna's experience, everyone's experience will be very different.
No, I'm just thinking, like, could I feel and see at the same time? Or was only one of them happening at the time? With your attention switching between the two, or whether it's actually you can do both at exactly the same time.
So that's a really good question.
Maybe.
Anyone have a different experience?
Thank you. I can't believe I caught it. Good morning, everyone. For me, probably I know I am quite a visual person, have been a visual person. Starting with a visual image, that's how I begin. It's like a broad understanding of what necks, legs, hands, whatever are like in general. It's not necessarily yours. It's a broad. It's like a Matisse. It's just a sketchy sort of image of it. And the touching and whatever else happens, it could be smelling or what you hear, whatever the other senses are, they add to that in layers. So touching the neck yesterday was not a separate image. I don't think of it like that at all. It's not a separate image. It's a layered image. It adds to the broader image that you already have with much more detail. And then it is actually yours because you're touching quite specifically, in that instance, your own neck.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sue Scott. Hello, Sue Scott. Do you want to talk?
Oh, sorry. Oops. So mine was completely different. I had no idea what you were talking about. I've got a better idea now, but I had to go home. I'd already said this to you. I had to go home and Google kinesthetic to get a better understanding. And then Alison just asked me a couple of questions, and then suddenly my visual image suddenly comes in and is outside, but suddenly I got, I've got this little inside bit that suddenly is coming in just from that quick question that she asked this morning.
What was
So-
the question, Alison?
Oh, she just said, well, she said her visual, or did you ask me the question? She asked me, was my visual image from the outside or inside? And I was like, oh, outside. But then by the time we talked, I suddenly had this kind of more visual thing of inside. So thank you.
Great. Anyone else unclear about what the word kinesthetic means?
What I thought.
Yeah?
Did you do the same thing?
It meant feeling, but maybe it means more than that. Is that right? Or
So our kinesthetic sense is often classified as our sixth sense, and it's our ability to sense our movement and relationships in space. So we get feedback from receptors in our muscles, in our joints, in our ligaments, and in our tissues that we can use to form images, can match with what we see, what we feel, and we form images with it. So it's my kinesthetic sense that's telling me how much my elbow is bent. Also, how quickly I'm bending it. Or where my hands are relative to one another, where they are on the floor, what position my head is in space, which is also informed, of course, by your vestibular sense and your visual sense.
is it a bigger concept than proprioception?
It is proprioception.
Oh, it's the same thing.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm delighted that you could have asked the question in class. So you, in future, if I say something and you have no idea what it is, sometimes you can sit with it and that's terrific, and other times you can ask, because you'll be sure if you don't know what it is, there'll be somebody else that's not sure. And yeah, that's cool. I'm just reminding you that, you feel free to ask. So did anyone else have a different experience?
Yep.
Oh, coming. Several. Teamwork.
Look, I had a very vivid imagination, I suppose you'd call it, Technicolor 3D, and because I actually was watching the skeleton move in that visualisation, you would call that a kinesthetic.
Was it inside of you, or were you looking outside of yourself?
Oh, both. Yeah,
both.
That was pretty out there. Yeah. Yeah, it was a really nice colour and everything. But even when I walked away at the end of it, I closed my eyes again and I looked down, and I had a visual sense of looking down through the chest at my hips moving, and it was pretty out there. Yeah. So that would be a kinesthetic experience because of my sense of movement. It was my imagination, but I was actually.
If the sensations are coming from inside of yourself and forming an image, it's more likely that that's a kinesthetic image.
Yeah.
But it also sounds like you were visualizing when you're outside of if you're outside and looking in, that's more of a visual image.
Well, I hold you responsible because you led me into it.
That's fine. I'll take responsibility. So the majority of people tend to be visual. We live in a visual culture. If we can see, we can. Whoa. It's often a predominant sense, and it's a really important sense. But, some people, you may have heard of, people who are blind and they have an apparatus put in their abdomen and they learn to see an impression from the signals that are fed into their skin from a camera. So it's not their visual cortex that's necessarily operating there. It's their kinesthetic sense being utilised to form a visual image.
I find that I rely on the visual image to get that sense of movement and distance.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it needs to be a visual cue. Otherwise, for me, it's just, the feeling is just a mood.
Uh-huh.
It's like if I have tension in my jaw or in my neck, I can see how it affects my mood rather than going, oh no, that's just a sensation, that's where it is.
Yeah.
I can actually visualize where it is in the body.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. So some people find themselves switching, as I heard, from one to the other, and both are abilities that we can cultivate. We usually have a dominance. And it's more common that visual is dominant. But you'll find in performers, physical performers, musicians, often the kinesthetic sense is more dominant. And one can inform the other. When we work and we're observing someone, we're more strongly using the visual information, but when we start doing making contact with our hands and giving feedback and sensing someone, it's important to recognize your kinesthetic sense and to be perhaps to develop a 3D image of the person. So it's not just a surface image, and that your kinesthetic sense, the development of that, helps inform that image of the other. Sorry.
Sue?
Yeah.
If you were somebody and you were a very visually dominant person, would you at times close your eyes when you work?
Absolutely.
You do?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I wondered about that.
Especially at the beginning. So when I was very visually dominant, but at the beginning, and then I think I became more kinesthetic, strongly kinesthetic. Yeah. So we all have that capacity in us, but it needs to be cultivated and developed. I could only see, I couldn't sense. No. And I realized that the images I was forming, I was listening to those images rather than what I was sensing with my hands. Yeah. The visual was so strong, it interfered with my ability to sense. So
that visual,
yes,
feedback.
And you'll do explorations doing that, I'm sure.
And so I've got one more question.
Yes.
We talked last segment and Zoran said something that just really kind of clicked for me, was about the essence of the movement. Is that the same kind of thing we're talking about?
Can you give me a context?
Oh, he was just saying about when we were doing an ATM about being, I can't even sure if I can remember exactly what he said, but it's just about when we're doing an ATM, focusing on the essence of the movement rather than putting your arm at this angle and putting it here and doing there. It was more about, like, what does it feel like inside? So that's the same thing,
isn't it? It would link into that. I'm not sure that without seeing what you were doing and
building
yes,
that sort of skill to go into what we're talking about now. Is that how you?
Yeah.
Do you remember that? Because that was one thing that really kind of stuck for me, because it made a difference to what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It made a difference.
I was talking about Zoran last segment, and when he was talking about the essence of the movement. And is that, when he was talking about that, is that the same thing as we're talking about now? Or is that just something that he was like sort of building a skill into this? You know what I mean? Do you remember when he talked about that?
Good catch.
Do you mean like the quality of the movement in terms of ease or texture, or?
Like about just not focusing on how you do it. Yeah, it was just a very broad statement. It's a very broad statement. Not.
So it could have been relating to your attention.
Maybe.
So if you're focusing too hard on a particular place,
yes, maybe,
then the global coordination is more likely to escape you. Yes. That essential organisation of the nervous system, but an essential capacity, because it is the kinesthetic sense that we have. If I can't feel where I am, I'm not likely to know when my leg is stable, when my foot is underneath me. I'd have to relearn to use my visual sense to give me the information that I need. And so it'd be very slow.
Yes. Yes.
So we are definitely cultivating the kinesthetic sense. And the more clearly you can appreciate what's happening inside of yourself as you're moving, sometimes we have a small spotlight and a detail, but we're building a global picture, which is one of the essences of the method, is that movement doesn't happen in just one place, one moment in time. It's happening in three-dimensional space, and one of the difficulties that most of us have is that when we've had an injury or we've habitually used ourselves in a particular way, we have developed habits of use that usually involve too much work in the muscles, and it's difficult to appreciate or to have an accurate kinesthetic sense there. So this comes back to what Moshe was talking about, is we act according to our self-image. So if my self-image is a holding in the shoulder and a protection because I've injured my shoulder, then I'm going to move in that way and use myself in that way. And it's often Moshe referred to it as a scotoma. It's a blind spot. And one of the threads through the whole training is the gradual disentanglement and the revealing of more of ourselves into our action, getting a clearer self-image.
From what you're saying then, I presume if a person were to be a practitioner, then if they can't get a sensation of some part of themselves, then they won't feel it in somebody else.
They are unlikely to know what's possible in someone else.
That's interesting.
I'm still a bit confused about kinesthetic because I can see if it means where your body is in space, that's one thing. But when we're doing ATMs, it's very much, does this feel easier than the other way I moved, or a little bit less stiff, or that's not where your body is in space, is it? Is it? Because I wouldn't have characterised it that way. But
well, it's feedback.
It's feedback, and it's
feedback
a feeling
from the proprioceptors. So ease, the feeling of ease, is coming from your perception of several elements, but it's coming from the joint. It's coming from the lightness of the movement. We use lightness and ease as a tool to differentiate between what movement is better organised or less well organised. That's a tool that we can use, and it does come from our kinesthetic sense.
So if we just lumped it all into bodily sensations, that might work. Bodily sensations.
Just a second.
Can we so lumping it all into bodily feeling sensations would be what kinesthetic means?
Lumping it all into.
Well, yes, I where my arm is in space, I see it's one thing, but how I actually sense in my muscles or my bones it's not where they are in space. Is that hurting? Or no, it's not hurting anymore. That's all kinesthetic.
Hurting's another one, but the sensations that arise as you move yourself are coming from the receptors in your muscles, in your tendons, in your joints, your ligaments and tissues, that give you information about yourself. It can be information about the speed of movement, the relationship of body parts, about the ease of or difficulty or the effort of a movement. Oh yeah, go on.
Yeah, I am. We were talking about my difficulties not to connect with what I'm sensing. I am kinesthetic predominant person. My difficulty was to link with the image, and I have two ideas about image that I can imagine about the information I have from my body, and the image I see in the mirror or an image I see in the skeleton. And imagination for me, I sometimes I lost, and my thoughts maybe are in another place, and it's difficult to me sometimes to link what I am sensing and to construct an image. But as you say, something you get the ability,
you will develop the ability.
Yeah.
Yes. Philippa, and then maybe Jenny.
This is a demo.
You
don't need blocks. Do I have to hold it? Yeah. Okay. Remember the cactus? Okay. Then the cactus on the floor went like this. And we did this on the floor. So this is kinesthetic. This is kinesthesia and imagery together. So I'm lying there and I think, oh, this is like overarm. But if this floor was water, I would be able to do freestyle. Yeah. Because that's what I'm doing. Because that's what I experience. Because the sequencing and the imagery fit together as overarm. So then I'm in the swimming pool and I'm doing overarm. I'll go, oh, it's perfect. Because now I get this, and as I do that, I'm rolling to the other side. So I've got the sequence and the imagery are working together, right? The kinesthetic response. And then I think, oh, right, well, what I'll do is I'll use this movement here as the beginning of something else. And so I have to be able to look at the feedback I'm getting from my body in order to be able to create a new image and possibility of where I can move in space. That's it.
Wow. Thank you. Jenny would like that.
So it seems to me that when we talk about having, whatever it is, 5 senses or something, we're fooling ourselves a little bit. It's a shortcut that kind of makes some tricky stuff easy. When we see things, it's about light falling on the retina and transferring into electrical signals. And when we hear things, it's vibrations in the air that vibrate the eardrum and so forth. Kinesthetic is like a bag of all the other stuff that is more than one sense. So it's certainly about all those things Stephanie said, sensing, speed. How do you do that? What measures speed? Is it kind of the sensation on your skin of the wind rushing past, or is it something from the visual images that are whizzing by, or is it something in your joints that tells you that, or all of the above? So when we think kinesthetic, we've got position in space, we've got orientation, we've got connection to the ground, we've got the sense of touch on skin, we've got pressure, how hard is that touch, and if it's very hard it might get to be pain. We've got temperature, which if it gets very hot or very cold can end up being pain as well. We've got other qualities like texture. So, you know, when we start to put our hands on people, does it feel solid and we think, oh yeah, that's probably bone under there? Or does it feel kind of spongy or squishy, or, you know, there's a whole language of concepts that we'll play with as we develop that. So there's lots of different sensory devices contributing to our, what we might just loosely call felt or kinesthetic sense. Does that kind of help? I've got a poster at home that's got a list of all those different things, which I'll bring you. You can have the big one.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, because what comes to mind when I think of the kinesthetic sense, but then I thought maybe it wasn't right, but I think it is because you've clarified. So I play a game with my boys on their backs where I write letters and they have to guess what letter I'm writing, and it's quite hard for them to do, but I guess that's a kinesthetic sense of picking up the feeling of touch. But then I also do it where I move their hands or their legs on a letter as well, so that's also a kinesthetic. And then I'm training them in their kinesthetic perceptual skills. So are they both kinesthetic, or are they?
Yes.
And then they're just different branches of.
Yeah.
Okay.
Subsets.
So would that be why men are more spatially aware, because they're generally more?
Would that be why men are more generally spatially aware? I think that could be it could be a generalisation.
Just in relation to what
Not
you're
necessarily.
saying.
I would say not necessarily. But one way it may appear is that in the educational systems, it has been favoured that boys play sports. Boys are more physical. So if they're engaged in those activities, it's possible that they will have a more developed spatial sense, but not absolute. Yeah. Okay.
When you were saying about drawing letters on your kids' backs and things, like I had my daughter had a spatial processing issue. So she had an eye behavioural test done, which was then they found out that she had problems to see shapes in space. So that's where you've got problems with your reading and writing and where your body is in space. But the improvement in her reading, writing, maths, everything from doing exercises. I had exercises similar to that. There was little things like back maps we did where I'd have like 3 lots of 3 dots on a piece of paper, and I'd have to do 3 dots on her back, and she would then have to tell me which dots they were, her lying prone on the floor and lifting various limbs, and then she'd have to lift them herself. Just heaps and heaps of things like that. And not one scrap of reading or writing homework was it that we did, nothing like that. And she jumped up about 8 months in her grading within 8 weeks. So and it just makes me think of all these kids that you probably remember going to school with kids that just had problems like that, and it's not something that would have been picked up in a normal eye test because her vision's 20/20. She's got perfect vision. So yeah, all that sort of thing just contributes to all their learning, and yeah.
And I would say thank you for that. I would say in the last 15, maybe a bit longer years, the amount of research and understanding on brain function and how the different functions interrelate has led to this enormous expansion of development of movement skills for the development of learning skills, not just learning skills, socialization skills. Yeah. Yeah.
There was another little bit they did was there was some neonatal reflex testing that they did, which I then took her to a network chiropractor I've taken her for months. But when we were doing the crawling yesterday, it was making me think of it because there was one test they did with her just on hands and knees and get her to turn her head to her left, but her elbows were doing that, which she hasn't lost that reflex as a baby if you do that. And that's all those kids at school that have to have their work sideways and write like that. And then they have trouble looking from there to a blackboard and things like. There's all sorts of
Well, it could
stuff
mean
that goes on from it.
It could mean that the reflexes that we have, that we're born with, haven't been fully integrated.
Yeah.
And you'll go into that a lot more, I think, with Susan, because, it's one of her areas of expertise. But it's interesting to link it now. And, we take for granted that we're functioning human beings, and we are. But so often our level of functioning only meets a perceived need of the world or our family or ourselves, and we don't fully develop all the functions that we are capable of, which is, what you're beginning to do in a training program, is to revisit and differentiate and free up your nervous system so that you have more choice, more possibilities for yourself, but you can also understand how to recognize it in other people. Okay. Motivation.
Yeah.
Narayan, sorry, you're going to be under the thing, aren't you?
Yeah, because you're saying the limited range of function is just basically due to contributing circumstances. So the capacity of a human being can be so much more than what we act upon just on our basic lives and circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And so wouldn't you need a really big motivation, or wouldn't you need some driving force behind it in order to actualize that? And not curiosity is a great key, but it's not,
I would say it depends on the individual. You'll find some people have a tendency to seek other interests, something drives them. Some people don't give a hoot. They're happy with content in their lives as they are. And some people are forced into that situation of trying to find a motivation when they have an accident or an illness, and they can no longer function at the level that they did previously or would like to. So motivation is do you want to say anything about motivation? A huge topic. And values. Oops, we'll just leave it here. One more thing on motivation. When I'm working with clients in my practice, unless they want to get change, unless they have the patience to accept that change takes time, it can be incredibly difficult or impossible for them to be assisted with the Feldenkrais method. So I think part of my job is to find out what they want, what they value, and to try and present what I or the method has to offer in a way that engages them to find the motivation or to find the curiosity to go where they want to go.
Motivation ultimately open up or limit the capacity to how much you go.
Sorry, say that with the mic. Can't quite hear you.
Not that it's particularly a measurable thing like capacity as such, but you're just kind of giving rough comparisons on our own judgments, and what we compare with, which will be different with everyone. But when you're saying, you see someone and you find out what they cater to, what they would ideally like to be at, where they'd like to be at or whatever like that, and that would just their motivation, that would enable the seed of capacity to expand out into to being or what you want to do basically.
If I'm understanding you right, that's the ideal.
Hmm.
Some people don't realize that there can be a gap between being motivated and actually getting where they want to get. They have to do something. You will? Yeah, seeing as it's there.
So motivation, like any other thing that we do, has a structure. So if you want to scratch your head, it takes an organisation of finding your balance over your feet, moving your arm, moving your fingers, maybe even moving your head as well. Physical things, we know there's a kind of a sequence and a flow. Motivation also has a sequence and a process and a structure inside that is something that we can explore and intervene with and reorganise to help people match that kinesthetic sense of wanting to actually do something, or being able to take the first step or the second or the 15th step in achieving some outcome. And maybe another day we'll have a look in more detail. But motivation certainly has to link to values. What really deep down is important to me. Not what I think I should think is important, but what really connects. And some of us, if you think about what gets you out of bed to do something, and what do you procrastinate about, sometimes it will be kind of the possibility of reward that we move towards gaining something of value. Think, oh, that'd be nice, I want that, so I'll do whatever it takes. Others of us know that it'd be really nice to have that thing, but if there's not a consequence, it never quite happens. So I have Christmas at my house as often as possible because I clean the house. Someone's coming, so there's a consequence if I don't do it. Okay, just ring some bells. There's a whole bunch of other things of whether we're more move towards or move away from, whether we like things that are options and possibilities, or whether we do the things that have to be done. So again, if you think about something that you've been putting off, are you saying to yourself, oh, I know I should, I have to, and that just makes you procrastinate even more? Or do you think, oh, I could do this, or I could do that, or I could do that first, and things happen? So there's a whole kind of sequence of elements to motivation that are really fun to play with and explore what's the difference between something that people just do and something that they just really have trouble making themselves get around to.
And I think you'll be visiting that a bit more, won't you, Jenny?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm just reading the Potent Self at the moment, and he's talking about cross-motivational versus mono-motivational, when we have, like, you know, what I want to do myself versus what I've been taught I should do. There's two cross-motivations that sort of, it's almost like putting more weight on the scales, and whichever one is heaviest, you know, gets priority, or, you know, clearing that stuff out of the way and just having more ease, I guess. It's, yeah. Can you say something about that, perhaps? Or?
I mean, how many people face this every morning? I'd love to get up and go out into the garden and enjoy the birds and the sunshine, and I'd love to stay in bed and have another few minutes sleep. Oh, and I probably should get up and do the emails before I come down here. Oh, and I've got to have breakfast. So it's complex.
And in this training program and the Feldenkrais method, you're learning to become more aware. So becoming more aware of those cross motivations helps you make a more informed decision. You choose whether, no, the consequence, as Jenny said, the consequences of this are such, I need to do it now. Or it doesn't really matter. However you make that decision, you know, it doesn't really matter, I'm going to do this. Then there's a whole nother level of cross-motivation, which is actually in the history of our experience and our habits, not so much in terms of what we think we should do as something we can identify in our thoughts, but what's happening in in our organization. So if I want to, for example, I want to walk forwards, but I'm walking forwards like this. Part of me is actually organized to go backwards. And that can happen because of, I don't know, I had a skiing injury and I fell backwards and I hurt my back and I kept protecting myself there. And so then I forgot that I was protecting myself and holding those muscles. And so this is the way I move in the world. So there's can be a long-standing cross-motivation inside of us in our organisation that impacts on whether something feels easy, something feels lighter, something feels heavier or difficult to do. Cross-motivation. A compensation? Did I call it a compensation?
Yeah, well, it's been recorded. You'll have to play it back and check.
A habit? I'm sorry. It's
there was a classic example of that in the Australian Tennis Open final a couple of years ago when Andy Murray was playing.
Oh, yes.
He was playing Rafa?
One of the top.
One of the top ones. Oh, no, the other one, Djokovic. They played several times. Andy had lost each time. He got to the final again. His wife was due to have a baby on the other side of the world any day. He had a history of not winning this particular match, and his body language, the commentators were picking it up. Instead of moving his body forward with his arm into the shots, he was moving out of the court as he tried to hit. And of course, the balls were going everywhere. You could see the body language so clearly. He was saying, I don't want to be here. I know I have to. It's the professional right thing to do. I want to go home. And so his body's moving one way, or his mind's moving one way, taking part of his body one way. He's trying to smack at the ball, and that doesn't work against Djokovic. So,
no.
Yeah, I guess so. Every now and again he'd get caught up in the match and you could see he really moved in and hit some amazing shots. But that was to me a classic cross-motivational example.
Lucky?
I've been finding for me with cross-motivational stuff over the last few years, it's very easy to get drawn into just sitting in all the cross-motivations and you sit there and you don't end up doing anything. You get into that space of not acting. But like the one of sitting in bed wanting to do the gardening, I've found like little ways to go, all right, how can I be in bed and go towards doing the gardening? It might be like, can I reach my socks and put them on in bed? So yeah, and it might be just one little action that helps both sides sort of dissipate a bit.
That's. I was just wondering, is this a cake? Is this a cake?
That's a cake.
And so, just one more example of that. One more example of the physical organisation of cross motivation. It's a bit of a. Let's hope I don't break the stool. So often you'll see in older people when they want to get out of the chair. Whoops. They're heaving themselves up. They're not bringing their weight forwards, which is where, like Jenny was saying with Murray, where you need to go in order to stand up. So the cross motivation can come from habit. They think they need strength or an idea that they need strength to stand up, or it can come from, I'm scared I'm going to fall. I feel old and frail, so I don't dare go there. But in actual fact, by not recognizing what's happening, they put themselves they're in a higher risk of falling. It's possible. They'll feel more safer sitting down, but if they want to go somewhere, they want to go to the dining room, and they want to get up. They're actually, by putting their arm back behind them, they're bringing their weight backwards rather than supporting their intention of getting up.
Yeah. Or I don't want to bend forwards because I've hurt my back before.
Could be.
So,
So that would be
I'm
another
not
one.
gonna do that.
Yeah. But we enact them physically in our organisation. But you see, I'm actually going back. But I could do it in many, many sorts of ways. I could do it like this. And yeah, so they think they need strength to get up. That's a, you know, an idea or image of the action that they've formed. That's the more efficiently. I bring my weight over my feet and stand up. Bring my mass over my base of support, and then we have mechanisms in our nervous system that right us if we're not interfering with them, so that getting up doesn't feel like an effort. That potential is in there, the anti-gravity mechanisms, or the tonic musculature that gets activated when weight is on a body part. Okay, so I'm going to suggest we leave that conversation now, maybe just have a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and do some ATM.